Welcome to this special edition of the Fatboy Show here on RX Radio. This is a special podcast that we're doing for the Fatboy Show. It's not something that we'll probably broadcast on the radio, but something that we might probably post on YouTube. This is going to be a long-form conversation in which I get to hang out with my friend Joel Bellenson. Hello, Joel. How you doing?
I'm excellent. Thanks. It's great to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah,
and we've decided that we want to make it a habit to have these meetings and have these conversations about a whole range of topics.
Well, we have this special freedom because we're here in East Africa.
Yes, we are. And, here, at least in this part of the world, the only way you get in trouble expressing an opinion is if you say something the politicians don't like.
Exactly.
Other than that, on most cultural, social issues, there's a bit more leeway, I would say. And there's not as much sensitivity. There's not much of a threat of getting cancelled, as is the case now in many parts of the West, where you dare say something that certain people find offensive and boom, that's the end of your career, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So maybe for those who don't know, just introduce yourself. Tell us who Joel Bellenson is and how it is that you happen to be in Uganda.
Okay. Well, I'm from California, from
Yes.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Grew up in a suburb where American Jewish University is, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about 5 minutes from the Reagan Library.
Right.
Hardly any Jews I grew up around. I grew up, all Christian world. Overwhelmingly white, but maybe 1/3 Latino.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I thought if I did well in school, I could kind of have more opportunities. So I went off to Harvard when I was 15 in chemistry, and then Stanford for biochem and international relations. And then I had a career starting up many companies in Silicon Valley.
So chemistry, biochemistry, and international relations. I don't know how international relations...
My strategy was I wanted to be involved in technology transfer to the third world. And I felt that biochemistry was at the heart of both healthcare and agriculture. And it seemed like the right skills to have.
Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Of course, these days you hear a lot of people speculate negatively about the influence of or how the powers and the big powerful institutions are utilizing pharmaceutical technology, agricultural technology, and all these things to suppress the third world, to control the third world. You've heard, for example, there's issues people have with Monsanto. That is a biotech company that produces genetically modified seeds, and there's much debate. In fact, I think it's in Kenya recently, last week, where a judge imposed some sort of injunction on the implementation of certain policies. I think they wanted to go GMO over there, and it's being met with a lot of resistance. So
my agenda was always democratization. Enabling more people to master the skills.
But can you understand why there's a lot of...
Oh, there has been my whole career.
Okay.
That's part of why I grudgingly went into it. I avoided it because of these concerns, and then I decided, well, could I simplify genetics and all of this so that more ordinary people could get involved? And that's why, in the end, part of my fame, my company assembled and annotated the human genome, and we did not patent it. And that allowed the whole world to use it. And a Ugandan was pivotal. He was the chief engineer.
Now, some people might think that, as far as the decoding the human genome was concerned, there's certain more familiar names that people will think of. They'll think of Francis Collins, Craig Venter, and people like that. So, how is it that you're inserting yourself into this process?
Well, both Collins and Venter certainly rank higher than me with PhDs and professorships. My company was a private company. We came along and took the public data and assembled and annotated it. And we beat Craig Venter's company by 6 months and triggered the congressional investigations around the genome because they were suddenly realizing that they almost had all of this governmental financed work end up becoming privatized by robber barons, basically, which Craig Venter is.
That was so my next question was going to relate to that. How is it then that you're not a billionaire? Because it would seem that to undertake such a thing, it's the kind of thing that attracts lots of money.
It did. I raised $100 million for my company. We put only $5 million into this. Our vision was Star Trek medicine. We wanted to be faced with a new disease and come up with a new drug as quickly as possible.
You wanted to be faced with a new disease, or you wanted to create a new disease? Because that's, or is that a Pandora's box we don't want to open right now?
Well, there's enough new diseases always evolving. Now, you're talking about the gain of function research. That's the whole ugly spiral of biowarfare. The idea that you simulate what your enemy might do in anticipation, which is obviously what blew up in the world's face.
And then once you create it, you're like, but why not use it anyway?
Well, even if
we could make some money out of this.
Well, even if you didn't have a malevolent intent, I mean, even the best lab techs are going to screw up, and they're going to leave the facility potentially and spread something. So
wow.
So that's the real problem, is that you're playing with fire.
All right, so to just take you back to what you mentioned earlier on how you were involved in that process, and you know, into what is it? Do you say you're decoding the genetic code?
We annotated
it.
We found the genes, the few percent of all of the DNA. There's 6 billion letters on each side, and like just 1 or 2% ends up.
And you did this as this was your company?
Yeah, Pangea Systems Double Twist. I founded it with my best friend from Stanford, a Black American named Dexter Smith. Edward Chiruluta, the Ugandan, became the chief engineer for our company in '94.
You would think that these people like that and yourself would be celebrated, and in particular because you had black people involved. You would think these were the people that, or maybe this was before the woke era. Because if it happened today, I'm sure they'd be plastered on the front covers of all major magazines, right?
Well, we also were the spoilers. As you rightly noted, there was billions, tens of billions, being bet on somebody trying to own the genome. And we were the spoilers. I found a way for us to be able to be neutral. I told the investors and all the other biotech companies, look, finance us. We'll do all this and make it available to your portfolio companies without having to pay royalties. And I did the same to the drug companies and the pharmaceuticals.
And you would be doing this because you care?
Well, it was a small piece of my overall goal. My goal was to be able to discover drugs in an hour. You know, be faced with a new disease, decode it, and figure out how to come up with a drug to fight it. So that was my dream, and this was just a teeny part of it. It was like what had to be done. Mm-hmm. And I felt that it just wasn't right for anybody, including myself, to own humanity.
As opposed to others who had no qualms with doing so and from profiteering.
Correct. I just felt like, look, something this powerful shouldn't have obstacles in the way of being used.
So did your company remain a private company?
We got bought by Merck Pharmaceuticals eventually. Our IPO failed on the day of the .com crash.
Okay.
We were going to be worth billions on the day of our IPO on NASDAQ. Uh-huh. Credit Suisse was the underwriter. We had the top venture capitalists of Silicon Valley and the East Coast as well. So we had Kleiner Perkins, Mayfield, IVP, Sequoia, Atlas, all the blue chip, venture capitalists were backing us. We'd come out of Stanford. My boss had won the Nobel Prize for cutting and pasting DNA, Paul Berg. The things I had already built, we built the first gene expression system to see what genes are turned on or off during different diseases or drug treatments. That was the first genomic system. Mm-hmm. And then I did it for proteomics to look at what proteins were activated or not. So I just pursued looking at the gestalt, what was going on in molecular cellular physiology, and trying to build large data mining so we could discover things quicker.
So I would guess that your company was bought for a significant chunk of change? 9
figures, but I didn't see anything out of that.
Why not?
I had already gotten paid some by the venture capitalists, and they had invested a lot of money.
So your stake in it had been reduced?
Well, I still had 15%, but so it was still worth a lot. But when the .com crash occurred, the valuation dropped dramatically.
Oh, okay.
And so when we got bought by Merck, even though it was for 9 figures, it really just enabled the investors to make their basic profit, which they were happy about.
What did that experience do for you? I mean, you must have felt crushed. It just seemed like it went wrong in so many ways, right? First of all, the fact that others took advantage of the technology, and that, of course, unfortunately, you met the .com bubble, which just denied you the chance to become a billionaire.
Well, it didn't really, that part, the fact that other people used it, I fully expected and wanted that. So that wasn't a bug, that was a feature. The goal was to enable anybody to use it.
So after that experience, did you embark on a new quest, a new dream?
Well, in parallel, we had digitized the sense of smell. I had found the genes.
What was that? You digitized the sense of
smell. So we found the genes, the olfactory receptor genes, in your nasal epithelium that detect fragrance. And we made three-dimensional models. And same way there's red, green, and blue for color, we came up with an indexing system for fragrance. And then we built a machine, like an inkjet printer, that could attach to your DVD movies, your video games, your advertisements, and have scent go along with whatever you were watching.
And how would you, what's the word, broadcast the smell? So, for example, if you, on a molecular basis, you broke down the composition of a particular fragrance or odor or whatever it is, and you annotated it.
So there's a digital file.
And so the idea would be there would have to be a way to...
There'd have to be machines on both sides to reproduce.
Right. So how does that work? So we understand, at least when it comes to visual imagery, like with a DVD, we know that the machine sort of reproduce the electric signals that are encoded on the DVD or on the videotape, and then it then converts that into the pixels or whatever we see on the screens. How does it work with the sense of smell?
So what we had was a digital way to describe fragrance, and then it activated whatever user's device. The device had a cartridge of 64 primary fragrances, and kind of like an inkjet printer. So the same way, combining them in different nanoscopic proportions, you can make thousands of smells with 64 basic smells. So that was my crazy innovation.
But are there... Is it based on some prior existing technology? Like at this moment, are there machines that can produce scents just by feeding it with the relevant information?
Currently, they're usually focused on just doing one or two few scents at a time, and they're just...
Because I would think it would have such a revolutionary impact on everything.
It did. We got tremendous interest from everyone. We had partnerships with Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Kraft Foods, Sony for the PlayStation, and Microsoft for the Xbox. We had 5,000 video game developers download our Setware Developers Kit. We had partnerships with Columbia TriStar, and DreamWorks for adding.
Okay, so in the same way that you would have a Sony or a Panasonic make a DVD player, were there some manufacturers that were looking into developing on a mass scale the machines that could be used to sort of translate that data into the actual and to reproduce those odors?
Definitely. Before we came along, there were people screwing around in their garages trying to get this done. I came along, got it done in a few weeks.
I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear this because it's not something you've heard discussed much. It almost sounds novel, and from how you're saying it almost seems like this is something you've been working on like decades ago.
Well, I did do it.
This is like 2000.
Yeah, 2000 we got on the cover of Wired magazine.
Okay.
And so I got tremendous media coverage. Our companies were getting mentioned probably 5,000 times a month between radio, TV, magazines, newspapers.
This wasn't Pangea.
This was DigiSense.
DigiSense.
So if you look up, one of the greatest articles was in Wired magazine. It's called You've Got Smell. That's when I demoed for them the very first public demonstration of the prototype I built.
But how could this not have taken off? Like, I can't understand if not through your own efforts. Surely it would have caught the attention of other developers who would have wanted to develop it as well.
Huge amount of attention.
And how? Yeah. So how come almost 20 years later, there's nothing? Okay.
So first of all, we were about to do a gigantic financing. As of April 2001, we were raising $150 million, led by Goldman Sachs, with Unilever and Givaudan. Givaudan had already invested $5 million in us. They're one of the top fragrance and flavor chemical companies in the world, based in Switzerland. So they were going to up their investment to $50 million. Unilever was going to put in 50, and Goldman Sachs was going to put in 50. And so that's where we were at, and we were going through the due diligence, and we passed all the due diligences of all these entities. And then the CFO of Givaudan had a political move, and he wanted to move against the CEO.
Okay.
And so he used the fact that we hadn't gone through this degree of due diligence on the first round of investment to try to embarrass the CEO. So the CEO, who had been the champion of the deal, had to back out of it. So the whole deal fell apart April 11th, 2001.
And once that investment didn't go through, then
I laid off 90% of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Devastated, heartbroken, tried to restart it. Me and my partner, tried everything we could think of, and then he had his own family challenges. His mother's businesses in Jacksonville, Florida, were under attack by hoodlums. So we went down there to defend his family.
This is Dexter?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we went down there to defend his family businesses, and we canceled all of our appointments.
Do you mean physically? You went there and got rifles?
I don't want to go into all the details, but it wasn't pretty, and we needed to evacuate his mom from her house, given what we had done the days before to our nemesis, and we were just trying to evacuate her before the gangs woke up.
This sounds like a very interesting story, and I can understand why you'd feel reluctant to get into it. But
so that was the morning of 9/11.
Oh.
So we were getting calls. I remember Dexter got a call from his wife now, Jill, saying, "Look, I'm watching TV. Some crazy lunatic just flew plane into the World Trade Center." He's like, "Honey, I got a serious situation in the real world right here. We got to focus on this." And so, she called again when the next plane hit. And meanwhile, we got his mom out, packed her up into a van, brought into the Holiday Inn, and we entered the lobby right as the buildings were collapsing. So that was kind of a metaphor for what was going on in our lives. Mm-hmm. A few weeks later, the thought hit me. It's like, wait, didn't we usually go to the World Trade Center and meet with Morgan Stanley on the 50th floor? Because they were the ones who were going to restart us.
My goodness.
So this guy was a real passionate supporter of ours, Jose Roscoe. He was the one who was always trying to organize everybody from Morgan Stanley to meet with us. And we had numerous failed attempts of getting all the decision makers in the room. And I had forgotten about it, right? I just canceled all of our meetings to go help out Dex in Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And a few weeks later, I realized, wait a second. Wait. Didn't we usually meet on the 50th or some floor of WTC? Then I called up Jose. Thank God he was still alive, but he was totally shell-shocked. All of his workmates were killed.
Oh, he'd successfully been evacuated.
He got out, but the other guys at Morgan Stanley that would have invested, they were killed. So it was kind of like, maybe we just need to take this as a message that, we had been starting companies since the 80s. And it was like, whoa, maybe we do need to focus on family or something. We've just maybe not focused on what we should be. So we sent a letter out to the investors, heartbroken, and said, look, we're giving up. We can't keep on like this.
But I don't know. To me, it just sounds like for a technology like this, it would surprise me if there weren't people trying to beat down your door.
I get calls every few months. Somebody contacts me.
Like, well, I mean, it would revolutionize gaming,
media,
entertainment, media, Hollywood, everything.
We were even guests of honor of the Adult Video Awards for 3 years in a row, to tell you how.
I wonder why they would be interested.
I think you know.
No? Why? They'd want to release videos that would allow you to smell the scene, what was happening in the room?
Everything from perfume and flowers and musk onwards.
My goodness. It's just...
smell is part of sex.
Is it now?
It's why people wear perfume, cologne, right?
But surely... so is it really the case that you've given up on that dream?
No, it's not.
Because the ideas are still there. The technology, the science, you have all of it somewhere.
The thing is, usually people would come to me and they didn't have enough capital to make it happen. And I know how much.
So if someone came to you now with 100 million, if Elon Musk said, "Hey, here's 100 million,"
I would do it. Yeah. Usually, I'm getting people. Oh, here I have a.
well, you could send it.
We can get a grant for a few $100,000 and restart it. And I'm like, not interested.
Really?
Yeah.
He's highly responsive on Twitter. You might want to reach out to him. He's there busy putting out fires.
Well, during the lockdown that happened, an old fan of DigiSense, friend of mine, Francois Weinberg, he chased me down to Uganda. And he said, you want to try digitizing taste? Taste. So that's what I've been working on, doing AI for taste for the food and beverage industry.
That's interesting. So what would that do? Eliminate the food tasters, wine tasters?
Well, or at least it would accelerate the product development process. So if they want to localize a product for a different culture, they could more rapidly morph an existing brand. Or with the global supply chains getting disrupted and now they need to get ingredients from different places than they used to, then the quality control questions are big and taste is central.
I can't wrap my head around it. So there you are sitting on this amazing technology, and here you are now in Uganda doing what exactly?
I do lots of things here.
Tell us what you do currently in Uganda. And maybe before you tell us, maybe you can tell us how it is that you decided to come to Uganda.
Okay, well, I mentioned that I had a personal relationship through my chief engineer,
Mr.
Chiruluta from Masaka. And when the company after DigiSense that I started in Canada, the Canadian government begged us to come there. And so we moved. And because partly the vibe in the U.S. after 9/11 was really getting unhealthy. It was disturbing. Just, I think the whole world knew that at the time.
Not a good time.
So I figured, let's just get out. And Canadian government had been asking me for years to come there and help them set up Biotech in British Columbia. So we did. And we initially started with a company looking at genetic variations and predispositions to cancers like cervical and liver cancer, and whether or not you'd have bad reactions to a medication, see if you could predict that through people's genetics of their liver enzymes. And so we developed assays for that, but then the FDA raised the requirements tenfold on the number of retrospective patients you'd have to have, so basically the amount of samples and thus the cost. And I was like, wow, we can't afford to do this on the budget we have. So I said, let me do something that's always been my dream, which was Star Trek medicine. So with my science advisors, I go, what disease could we chase where we could come up with a potential drug quickly, just using computational approach? And so
Wait. That sounds dangerously similar to Theranos.
No, they were doing testing. They were doing diagnosis. This was drug design.
Okay.
So this is even more crazy, more like the mRNA vaccine. So I've been involved in all the most scary stuff you've heard about. I designed one of the first PCR machines in 1987. I made the first robotically produced RNA at Stanford in 1991. So I've been, our software designs sequences that could be used for antibodies, right? So I've been in this game for a long time. I knew there was a lot of obstacles. I've been skeptical, and I heard about the mRNA vaccine. I was like, have they solved this problem and this problem and this problem? And I went and checked, and wait, they solved...
You mean the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, when they were announcing it, I was like, because we found out back in the 90s that the uracil was causing inflammatory reactions. So then I found out they discovered they could replace it with a uridine as a replacement for uracil. I was like, okay.
Is it true that mRNA vaccines change your genetic code forever, and permanently?
No. They're not. They're not getting reintegrated into your genome, and certainly not into your balls or ovaries.
Really?
No, that's just not where it's going.
Okay. All right.
So and mRNA is really fragile. It disintegrates so quickly from enzymes in your body. Even your fingertips just destroy RNA really quickly. So even synthesizing it in the lab, the amount of precautions they had to take so that nothing human would interact with, or anything biological would interact with the RNA, was just immense, right? Because it's just the RNA falls apart so easily.
Okay. And could that be why there's been lots of questions about the efficacy of vaccines developed using that technology?
I think the question was really just how fast it all happened. I think that scared people to death. And
it would appear that they were already working on such a vaccine even prior to the outbreak of the pandemic, which leads many people to suspect that this could have been a plan.
Well, people have been working on vaccines for decades, right? I mean, I was doing this stuff, trying to develop RNA vaccines in 91.
Well,
so
it would seem like it's a bit convenient that now you have a global pandemic and out of the blue you tell us, and I think Moderna was the first one. Was it Moderna the first to come out with theirs to say, oh, incidentally, we've been working on a vaccine? And
well, there was already SARS that had happened in 2002, 2003, right? Which I was involved with sequencing at British Columbia Genome Sciences Center. So everybody was already trying to come up with vaccines against the original SARS. And so this current, or whatever, the initial version of the COVID scenario was about 80% related to the original SARS.
Wow. Did you ever meet that Chinese scientist?
No.
The famous, they call her the Bat Lady.
Never. No, I was more of a lab automation, IT guy,
right,
just trying to get the different parts.
So you're more involved in the technology side of the...
Yeah.
As opposed to actually handling the specimens and the...
I never
messing around with the microbes.
I didn't touch viruses. I dealt with bacteria, dealt with fungus, but never dealt with viruses. I mean, dealt with bacteriophage. But.
So there you are in Canada, and attempts to get funding for for the trials for the technologies you're developing.
Well, we had already gone public on the stock market, and the FDA had changed the rules.
Okay.
And so now I didn't have enough money to do what we had intended to do.
So that meant you had to drop it?
Well, instead of doing these, the first, attempt was to use tests that would detect cervical cancer, liver cancer, or if you were going to have a bad reaction to medication. That was the dream we had to drop. Instead, what I said, let's just go after quick drug design. Could we design drugs really quickly against a pathogen? Because when my friends pointed out, look, you're not going to be able to come up with a cardiovascular or a metabolic or a neuro drug fast enough to get feedback from humans. The only thing you could do that would be quick enough would be something that attacked a pathogen, a microbe. And so I said, well, and then their comments were, and nobody cares.
Really?
Nobody wants to develop antibiotics. There's just not enough market. It's so generic. The profit margins are trivial.
Right.
So people don't care about infections. The big drug companies do not care. Until this crisis, they barely cared.
Let me ask you something. Is there a need to develop better antibiotics? I mean, the ones on the market now, you don't think they already do a good job? The generic varieties that are produced in India or China? Or...
Well, there's always bacterial resistance to our meds, right? So, yeah, there's always a need to do it. Like we have resistance to malaria drugs.
Was that part of what you were trying to work on?
Because I used to have my smart-ass slogan, only computation can beat bacterial mutation.
Okay.
And
that's a cheeky slogan.
I was filled with them. We were so cocky. Our slogans were legendary. Can't stop the world. The company was named Pangea. So the whole idea that we were inevitable and unstoppable. And then we went even further into hubris, saying only God manages more DNA data than Pangea. And on the other side of the t-shirt it said, and we're catching up. So... yeah, no, we were totally making fun of our own megalomania. But in terms of this, it was like, I wanted to prove that computation could keep up with mutation. And I decided, okay, well, if the drug companies don't care about ordinary diseases, then let's go to the absolute extreme, the most neglected diseases, the ones that hit the third world. And so I decided to go after malaria and sleeping sickness and black fever. And they're evolutionarily related. And so we used the data in the public domain out in the literature, and we did some data entry, subjected it to algorithms for chemistry and whatnot. And within 4 months, we had designed new drugs against it. And we had a lab in Russia make them for us, and we tested them in labs in Canada. And we had about a 30% success rate with drugs we had designed in our bathrobes at home.
Is that good? 30%?
Normally, it's 1 out of 10,000.
What do you mean normally?
When normally they come up with new drugs, when they do screening at the drug companies, 1 out of 10,000 of the chemicals that they try has any glimmer of possible effect.
And in this case, 30%
of
yours seem to be showing some.
We had submicromolar efficacy overnight at killing trypanosomiasis, malaria, and black fever, leishmaniasis. So no one had ever done something that radical
so
before.
all right. So what does that lead to now? Does that now get the attention of some of the big players, the pharmaceutical companies who want to say buy the patents or get the patents?
Not yet, because they don't have to hurry. Right? Their big advantage is financing clinical trials. They have huge, databases, staffs, relationships with clinics and hospitals all over the world. We approached the Gates Foundation. They were interested, but again, not in a hurry. I went and attended their conference and listened to their self-congratulatory.
Their malaria vaccines taken a bit of time. They've not been able to finalize that one yet.
Well, the thing is, when you're dealing with vaccines for protozoa, which is what malaria is, it's not a bacteria, it's not a fungus, and it's not a virus. So protozoans are very complicated creatures. Their genomes can be larger than the human genome. So their ability to be shapeshifters is enormous, that they can become almost seemingly different species at different stages in their life cycle, and depending upon where in the body they are in us.
Okay.
So it's not easy. It's a tough game to figure out what part of them is staying constant.
Doesn't it seem like a challenge you'd want to take on?
Well, yeah, of course. That's why I like doing these things. I like things that are hard.
Okay, so this is a very interesting journey. Although it seems beset by so many challenges and you encounter so many hurdles. So now you were telling us the part where you were able to get a 30% success rate on the...
That's right. So then the next step was to do animal testing, right? Because these were in vitro, in glass, under Petri dishes. So now we had to test on animals. Unfortunately, North Americans seem to care about rodents more than humans. So their restrictions and requirements and costs for doing testing on mice and rats was just obscene. It was going to cost like $1 million.
Really?
To test these chemicals on mice and rats. So that's when I called up Chiraluta. And I was like, Ed, this disease hits your home country. They must care enough about this disease so that we can do some animal testing there. He said, sure. So he hooked me up through his family to the late Dr. Stephen Malinga. And I came to Uganda in 2007 and to set up animal testing at Makerere and at ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute.
Okay, so the Uganda government did show support towards this endeavor.
Yeah, and I met lots of great people, Martin Oteba, the ex-chancellor Mondo Kagonyera, John Anyaro, Enoch Matovu. I worked with a lot of cool scientists. And so I came back and forth.
Okay. So that's 2007. And from then on, you were back and forth between Uganda and Canada?
In Canada. And then the only Mzungu I bumped into turned out to be the head of the World Bank for East Africa. And without letting me know this, he passed my name on to ex-Prime Minister Nsimbambi, who called me and asked if I'd be willing to serve on the President's Investment Roundtable for biotechnology, life science.
Amazing.
So I was like, oh, shit.
What an honor.
Well, I was scared. I was like, well, am I going to get in trouble for this? Because in the U.S. and the West, working with, African governments is considered something you're not supposed to do. And so I decided, fuck it, I was going to do it.
Okay. So what did that lead to? And for how long were you in this role?
I did that for 4 years. And I met all kinds of interesting people, the tycoons of the country, and discussed, the biotech laws. And my views never were black and white on it. I always felt you have to do case by case.
So what would you say was the outcome of that? Like through the work you were doing in some of the research facilities here in Uganda, like are there any notable breakthroughs that you can tell us about?
Well, with our case, we got our results, and they pointed to us needing to redesign the drug as a salt, so it would, or to nano encapsulate it, which is actually what happened with the mRNA vaccines. They did nano encapsulation, lipid nano particles, right? Mm-hmm. So really that's what we needed to do for our drug as well, so that it could be better absorbed. And that was going to cost about $1 million. Okay. And I didn't have the extra $1 million to do it. So
did you ask around?
We did, but this was in the midst of the 2008, 2009 collapse of the stock market. So that was another heartbreaker where I had to just accept this is dead for now. The dream still lives, but it'll have to be resuscitated in a new way in another time, and just accept that, massive setbacks can happen beyond your control when markets crash. It's now happened to me twice.
Yeah, the dot-com crash and then the
'08 crash. And I realized, well, Joel, you do super risky stuff, super imaginative stuff, and by the time it's getting funded, it could be sometimes that it's near the end of the bubble.
Right. And so is there a lesson to be learned here that you need to move faster?
If you can, or just be ready for the rug to be pulled out from under you and accept it.
Because it sounds like, from this very interesting story that you've relied upon a lot of luck and coincidences, like to get ahead, people introducing you to other people that could potentially help. It just, I don't know, 'cause one could say that maybe if you were more aggressive in pushing, that a lot of these things could be realized faster. What would you say to that?
I wouldn't disagree that maybe I should have been even more.
That maybe you're just such a tech head that you're happy to just be in your bubble of technology and not so much, kind of like a Apple situation where you were the Wozniak and maybe you didn't have the jobs in you.
Well, funny, people used to call me the Steve Jobs of biotech. So,
really?
Yeah. So I was the one who would see how to integrate.
You were the visionary.
And the technologies, I would figure out how to bring the technologies together to create a purpose. Now, some people back in the Pangea days said I was too aggressive and I was too much of a jerk. So now with when we were doing the drug development or DigiSense, was I still not aggressive enough? I don't know. Sometimes aggression isn't what's necessary. But I mean, I think anybody looking at it would have to say we endured some pretty serious setbacks and heartbreaks.
You just always feel like you're just a few footsteps away from massive success. Like all through your journey, I'm just hearing all these close calls and
but it's like even our definition of success, it shouldn't be so binary. I mean, I feel like I've been tremendously successful, that I've been able to take my little dreams and turn them into things that worked and raised lots of money. I've raised over $130 million for companies I've started. How many people get to do that? I've been in the room with some of the most powerful people in venture capital and finance and pharmaceutical and et cetera, and consumer electronics and fast-moving consumer goods. So I don't know. I almost feel like it's spoiled sour grapes to be complaining. That, compared on almost every front, I succeeded beyond anybody's wildest dreams. That, because there's so many people who come up with ideas that get nowhere.
Do you think there's a chance that you might, given everything you've learned, all the knowledge you've accumulated and developed, that maybe if you were to put it out there in, let's say, the open source community, we did, to just put it out there and to just let people mess around with it?
But that's what we did with the genome, right? We made our tools available for anybody to assemble and annotate the genome.
That was for the human genome. I'm talking about, let's say, for example, the
for DigiSense?
Yes.
Or for the drugs?
DigiSense, the one where you can basically synthesize smells and fragrances, like that.
We explained how to do it, just people haven't been able to replicate it.
But like I can't, because okay, so when I look at the trajectory of,
I mean, it was not trivial. First of all, realize how hard it was. I had to bring the head of chemical warfare from Mossad to do the chemical testing to make the cartridge for the DigiSense
really
device. I mean,
wow.
to simulate all the permutations and combinations of those 64 chemicals interacting with each other, the plastics, the epoxies, so we could meet Procter & Gamble's demands, because they were going to ramp up manufacturing and distribution. So for us to meet their ruggedization requirements, we had to simulate, cartridges traveling across the North America, across the Rockies at high altitude, freezing cold, and then going through boiling hot deserts, and then somehow eventually ending up in some kid's house where they're going to play a video game. And if the thing had been, stressed from all the chemistry and heat and temperature changes, it could crack and cause a disaster, right? So the amount of work it takes to develop such a complex product is not a joke. So
I know.
Even when I've given everybody every recipe of how to do it, it's hard.
It's just, I feel like, as I was saying, when you just look at how technology has sort of progressed, I feel like, and maybe it's just because I look at it from a surface level, maybe there's things happening that I can't see or I don't know of yet, but it just seems like things have stagnated. Like all we hear about is the latest new phone, okay? And the new version can take slightly better pictures than the previous one. Oh, wow, please upgrade. It's like, it's been that way for the past 15 years. There's never been anything truly groundbreaking that has just shaken the foundations of our understanding of science. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like that would be that next new frontier, that next new innovation that will just change everything.
Definitely. That's why I pursued all these things, because I
and
felt that we
I just
could
feel
go...
I feel so sad that it almost seems like there's not much movement in that direction. You barely read about it or hear about it, and for many people this will be their first time to hear about it.
Well, even for them to know that a Ugandan was the chief engineer on the most important biomedical project in all of world history.
That too.
I mean, that Edward Chiraluta was the chief engineer, and a black American was the president of this company. And this was starting in 1989 when Dexter and I co-founded the company in our apartment in Oakland.
And that will be a powerful story to share. In fact, and especially now when people are sensitive to these sorts of things, it's such a shock that it's largely an untold story. And where is Mr. or Dr. Chiraluta at this point?
He's not a doctor, actually, but he's in, I assume he's still in Oakland, Berkeley area, California. We don't talk very often. He's in his own world. I'm in mine. So Dexter and I have gone in separate directions as well. There's only, when you go through so many setbacks together, it's profound. It's a profound experience to have been at. We've been the best in the world at what we did over and over and over again. We've been the best, unquestionably, on the planet. And yet, we haven't tooted our horn loud enough. Edward never likes to have interviews. He never likes
That's such a shame, I think.
He's too humble. That's the problem. He doesn't want to take the credit, and I'm going to have to just constantly be saying, this guy, look, this guy, he's important. And, when I told the investment roundtable about him, nobody had heard about him. The president never heard about him. And it's like, this is someone infinitely more, I don't mean to denigrate, Kiprotich or Galola. Those are important dudes, but This guy is the chief engineer for the human genome. That's Amazing. Not a joke, right? This is like, NASA sending a man to the moon. That's what we did.
Okay, so...
and it lives on. So it's like, I don't see it as a loss. I see everything we did as having transformed medicine.
I think it would be nice. Are there resources online that people can check out to find out more about what Mr. Chiraluta is doing, the work that you have done?
Well, I know he just finished a few months ago working with a company that he was a co-founder of. I don't know their status, but they were trying to do 100,000 human genomes simultaneously.
Wow.
So that he was trying to just massively parallelize. We did one genome.
Okay.
And back then that was just agonizing. Well, to understand how this changed, when the genome started as a project in the mid-'80s, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation because I was the lab manager at the Carnegie Institute at Stanford. And I go, wow, to do this, it's going to take us like $100 trillion and like 100,000 person years. That's what I figured it would take based on what I knew was a state-of-the-art tech in 1986. And then we just collectively as an industry just kept on slashing zeros off the cost. I was involved with slashing 2 of 6 zeros off of the cost, basically 100-fold, over the next 15 years through optimizing DNA synthesis and sequencing and analysis. So as the cost dropped, I realized, once it reaches $1 billion, remember it was 100 trillion theoretically. So once the theoretical cost gets down to about $1 billion, then it's going to happen. So I positioned us to be ready. And so we were ready to catch the ball when the data was coming off. And we had already built up all the systems to analyze it and chosen analytical approaches that turned out to be superior to our competitors, and that's why we beat them. And I told Craig Venter I was going to beat him. Because
how does he feel about you? He knows you personally.
We haven't talked in decades. Because we met, we were both advising the CEO of Novartis. There was like a dozen of us visionaries that had been called to Cold Spring Harbor, which is a major medical research hub in the U.S., and we were there to advise the CEO of Novartis and about the direction we saw things taking in medicine, molecular medicine. And I had met Craig before at some conferences. It was my first time having a chance to talk to him at all. He's a very confident man, and he had a billionaire wife and access to lots of capital at NIH.
Yeah.
And here I am just like an interloper, and with my company in Oakland, California. By the way, I should point out, you've seen where we started our company. The whole world has. You've seen the movie Black Panther.
Yeah.
Remember there was the retrospective where Killmonger's dad gets killed in an apartment in Oakland in 1992? So I was living in that building in 1992.
Get out.
That's where Dexter and we were roommates.
Hang on a second. Was that actually shot on location, that scene?
I don't know for sure. But that neighborhood, when they showed the basketball court, that's where I played basketball.
Really? You remember the exact place?
Yes. We were on 3rd Avenue in East Oakland.
Interesting.
And so, from our apartment on the 16th floor, you could see where Huey Newton used to be held in jail in the Alameda Courthouse.
Who's Huey Newton?
Huey P. Newton was the founder of the Black Panther Party.
Oh, wow. So, okay, I can kind of connect the dots. So it wasn't by coincidence that's where the opening scene of the movie was set.
Probably.
Because of the significance
of Oakland as the founding of the Black Panthers.
Right.
And that building having a bird's eye view of the courthouse.
Quite interesting.
I don't think that wasn't highlighted in the movie. Even the whole name Black Panther, that a political party got named after it, but that was like a few months.
What came first, the party or the comic hero?
Comic book came first by a few months, but they both may have independently came out of an American military unit during World War II that was called the Black Panthers. So I think both of them could have gotten inspired by it. My Hebrew school teacher was Jack Kirby. So he was the writer of the Black Panther comic book.
Your Hebrew school teacher?
Yeah, at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California.
So he was like the religious leader.
Well, he was like an ethics
teacher.
He was like an ethics teacher. People take turns, educating young in the Jewish community.
When you say Jack Kirby, do you mean the Jack Kirby?
Yeah, him and Stan Lee were the founders of Marvel Comics, and Jack Kirby invented Spider-Man and Hulk and Thor and Avengers and all these characters. And he explained to us how he came up with them and how it came out of Jewish culture.
Really?
And even his idea of why he created Wakanda.
Really?
Yeah, his vision was he wanted to give black people globally a sense that they had in Israel, that there was some sacred, blessed place.
I have a feeling that that's a counterproductive sentiment to propagate, because it just makes from the reactions that I see, I think there's a tendency for many African Americans to sort of romanticize
there's that too.
African potential. That we are so capable of these things. If it were not for outside interference, colonialism, and all that, like we would all be kings and we would all be in a Wakanda paradise, which I feel like it's selling a dream that instills false hope, in my opinion.
Well, it was the widespread feeling of the time. It was, Pan-Africanism. This is the time of, all the greats, right?
Wow.
Kwame Nkrumah and all these people, Thomas Sankara, blah, blah,
So
blah.
there was a lot of excitement about where Africa could be headed next.
Yeah,
we were the next new hot thing.
Well, it was more like just can Africa unite, right? And that was whether it was Frantz Fanon, just that whole pantheon of intellectuals, Sheikh Anta Diop, who envisioned some sort of Pan-African development.
Mm-hmm.
I got exposed to all this in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But Jack Kirby was my teacher back in the 70s. So this general trend towards a Pan-African dream, you can say it was utopian. Maybe it's been harmful. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
It occurred, and people had that dream.
Uh-huh.
And obviously there's a billion flavors of Pan-Africanism.
That's true. And none of it yet to materialize.
Yeah, well, maybe
so far. But we'll see.
You never know. I mean, for the Jews with Israel, they said im tirtzu in zawad.
But we're here already. We have our country, so.
and we're here in the East African community, which now is coast to coast, right?
Which makes the term redundant, in my opinion, because now you've got, I think the DRC is trying to get into the East African
That's
community.
what I'm saying, that now that they are.
Are they already?
They've been admitted into it.
They were admitted. So it's like, okay, so what's the point of it?
Well, maybe the E needs to be removed.
Exactly.
Maybe we need to become the Middle African community. I don't know, but there is also the truth of DRC geography,
Is that
where Eastern Congo is so separate from Kinshasa, and DRC is just such a gigantic place. It's bigger than Western Europe.
It's huge,
So,
huge country.
Just huge and impossible geography. And so anyways, but there is there's the intent. There's the hope that somehow combining all of us into a common market and removing, tariff barriers and human barriers, that somehow more can happen.
I don't know. I very much believe in localized economies, but that's a discussion for another day. So where does the story of how does the story of Joel Bellenson end? What's next for you?
Well, obviously I got pulled here, and you could say the seed was planted when I was 10 years old listening to Jack Kirby. Or in uni when I fell in love with an African woman, and she told me about the famine in East Africa, and I was the president of the Jewish organization, so as head of Hillel at Stanford, I mobilized the networks that I could, and I got introduced to one of the largest concert promoters in California, and he gave me Santana, Grateful Dead, Journey, and Jefferson Starship as my first acts, so I could organize a concert, and that became Live Aid. And there's a whole bunch of stories within that.
Live Aid.
Concert.
Yeah. Well, you were involved in that?
I was the founder of it.
Get out.
I never told you about this?
Quit playing.
I'm not joking. I spent my third year of uni doing this, along with the anti-apartheid movement.
Really? So if I Googled Live Aid founders.
Nope, won't be on there. No. Here's what you want to know. The real story?
Yeah.
Here's the real story.
What's the real story?
So I was doing the anti-apartheid movement. That became my main focus. And aside from getting my honors in biological clocks. And we got those acts to start with, and I sent out letters using the president of Stanford's office. They were backing me on this. And I sent letters out, 50, 100 different performers, and they all said no. So I was pretty discouraged. I had my 4 bands, but it just wasn't what I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dreams had gotten more clear because I got concerned about aid. I got concerned that aid would breed dependency. So I wanted the question of how would aid facilitate capacity building and independence, as opposed to just people feeling good that they helped feed starving people just this time. So that was, part of my agenda, and I wanted us to review all these aid groups and how they allocated money between administrative and emergency relief and capacity building. And the university loved it. They loved the idea of having an educational component.
Okay, so, it eventually became a thing, so I'm guessing that
it was huge, but I screwed up. I overreached. And I was doctrinaire.
So
I wanted Winnie Mandela to introduce the concert, and she was considered a terrorist.
who's gonna? So, in your role as its organizer, how are you organizing the funding for this event?
People were putting in all their efforts for free. Nobody was charging anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened? So did you back out of it and someone else took over, or?
So no, what happened was the university backed out because I was talking to Azapo and Steve Biko's organization and trying to get his people or Winnie Mandela to introduce the concert, and the university felt very threatened because we had pretty ugly battles going on campus over apartheid, and we had built a shanty town that had disfigured the Stanford campus, and we all slept in it, thousands of us, unwashed, attending school. And I was the student representative to the board of trustees of the university. So not only was I president of the Jewish organization, but I was on the board of trustees, fighting it out with Condoleezza Rice every month, because she had the horrible, dubious distinction of having to be a black woman defending apartheid.
Wait. Was she a student?
No, she was provost of the university. She was our Soviet expert. She was my teacher. I told you I did international relations.
So really? So she was the one teaching you international relations, one of your teachers.
Yeah,
at Stanford.
She was our Soviet expert, and she was the provost of the university.
And she was pro-apartheid.
Well, she was anti-Soviet.
Okay.
And so apartheid was
thought to be
if they could hold back pro-Soviet labor unions and parties, which ANC was pro-Soviet. Ramaphosa and the unions were pro-Soviet, and so that's why they were terrified.
So interesting.
And so we would talk about this, because I would call her on the whole absurdity of the situation, that I was the big mouth opposing apartheid.
Were you her favorite? I'm guessing you weren't her favorite student.
Yes and no. She told my mother on graduation I had been her most promising student, but her biggest disappointment. So
you'd probably say the same about her now.
I don't know. I mean, she was, in some ways, I felt bad for her. She was getting these opportunities because she, in a way, fit a woke criteria.
Few would argue that she's not intelligent and educated and knowledgeable in her field, right? I mean, she's
an intelligent person. She plays great classical piano.
That too.
I'm more of an improv guy.
And she served in one of the most unpopular U.S. administrations in recent memory.
Yes.
So there's that. But anyway, this is interesting. It is quite a journey you've had, Joel, and I feel like Well,
I didn't tell you exactly how the university got out of it.
No, well, you said so. The university, they started to get concerned about
having Winnie Mandela. They didn't want
her.
Well, because she was considered a terrorist, and I was drawing together the two questions of apartheid and the famine in East Africa, as both of them being examples of Africans being the victims of inter-imperialist rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Okay, and so both situations were the collateral damage of them in their proxy wars. And so I wanted to draw the linkage, so people realizing that the problems in Africa are being caused by powerful parties fighting about each other. Mm-hmm. So the university wasn't so happy about that, and they came up with all kinds of creative excuses, claimed that we would make the city of Palo Alto unhappy with the traffic jam. And I go, well, we've had World Cup here. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's true.
What World Cup?
They had World Cup, games that were in the San Francisco Bay Area were at Stanford campus in some cases.
Oh, this is 94.
This is the 80s.
You're not talking about the football World Cup.
Soccer.
Yes.
So this is soccer in the 80s.
The World Cup was held in the U.S. in 94.
But they had playoffs that were held in various locations in the U.S., and Stanford Stadium was one of them.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. But we had other big things, too. We had concerts, of course. Football game of the stadium holds 85,000 people.
Okay, so wow.
So they were coming with lame excuses, and I confronted the council of vice presidents of the university every time they had their reasons why we suddenly couldn't do the concert. And the next one was, oh, marijuana is going to burn down the stadium. And I'm like, well, cigarettes smolder a hell of a lot longer than joints. And people have been smoking cigarettes at all of our football games, and they smoke dope at Santana concerts, which we have had at the same exact stadium, which did not burn down. And then the next one said, oh, the rock and roll music will cause the stadium structural integrity to melt from a resonance frequency. And I go, that's creative, but again, we've had concerts here, we've had football games, and just beyond.
I mean, they seem like very flimsy reasons.
They were trying to get out of it, and so then we moved it to Shea Stadium, New York, and we thought that was a wise move. But luck would have it, there was the workers at Shea went on strike, and Bruce Springsteen refused to cross the picket line. And so then we moved it to Philadelphia. By then, it was no longer going to have an educational component. The university wasn't going to be connected. My role was now disposable. They offered to let me introduce the concert, which I thought that was...
Okay, so that was your sort of point of entry. You were sort of the link between the event and the university that was ostensibly...
Well, that's where it was germinated, right? It was,
right.
I was because I was president of Stanford Hillel that I was able to mobilize Bill Graham and his concert promotion engine, and I was able to have 4 bands to start with. The president of Stanford admin who helped me, Catherine Milton, it was her husband that linked me to Michael Jackson's agent. And that's when he finally said yes, everything turned. Remember, I said I'd been getting rejections, piles of rejections, dozens. And I just focused all my energy on the anti-apartheid movement and my research on biological clocks. But then she came out to me in the shantytown. She said, Joel, you won't believe it, but we may be able to get Michael Jackson. And I was like, what? And I had almost completely given up. So the whole thing, once I talked to the agent, he put Michael on the phone for a few seconds. Oh, this sounds great. And then boom, everything happened. Everybody
Well, you talked to Michael Jackson?
For a few seconds, but I guess it's better than nothing. So anyways,
Wow.
well, yeah, I had already given up on this thing. Suddenly it comes back to life. We get everybody signing up.
Yeah.
After him, it was Stevie and et cetera, et cetera. Everybody came on the bandwagon, and I was like, wow, we're finally going to do this. And then I blew it with my my doctrinaire political stuff, and then it got taken.
Story of your life, huh? As with all things.
I usually go too far. I usually go too far. So that's the lesson I've learned.
Wow. It just, it's quite an amazing life you've led, and it sounds to me like it ain't over yet, and there's still plenty more interesting twists and turns ahead for you. Huh?
I'm hoping. Well, I'm here. I've managed to stick in. I didn't run away during COVID.
Uh-huh.
You remember all the foreigners?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Oh, I was helping foreigners find planes out of here. They were terrified, right? And they're like, why are you staying? And I'm like, because I'm not scared.
Wow.
And I'm not. The healthcare system sucks here. What are you going to do?
Were you impacted by the COVID? Did that disrupt your aspirations in your life here in Uganda?
Massively. The pharmaceutical factory I was building, president recently commissioned in Matuga, Chigogwa. I was the CEO and general manager of Day Biopharma and Day Naturals. Remember we talked about it when there was the scandal over the sanitizer.
Yeah, with this very interesting looking professor who looked like a James Bond villain.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the whole imagery was horrible. And you remember I was trying to, get us to move on and focus on, developing the company. But unfortunately, it was a public relations fiasco. And that, the owners already were suddenly in trouble because their wheat mills were their cash cow. And when the lockdowns hit, poor people stopped eating bread and chapati and switched over to rice and posho. So that was a huge blow to the Magola family finances. And so it led to all of us getting laid off. The entire conglomerate got shut down for a while and led to, a lot of challenges for me. I've come back from those, but I'm not the only one, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. So
put a big strain on my family life, and et cetera, et cetera.
So where things stand now, do you see yourself being in Uganda for a long time? I mean, you've moved around in your life.
Well, I've been here now, 10 years straight, 15 in total, including part-time. I don't have any agenda to leave. I'm here for however long, I don't know.
Okay.
It's a way to avoid the craziness in America and Europe. And I kind of, when I decided to come here, it was a big motivation was to sit out ugliness in America. I had seen this German movie that was made in '02 called Nowhere in Africa. A German Jewish guy was in his 30s, was doing business in Zanzibar, seeing the newspapers about rising anti-Semitism in Europe, and he sent for his wife and 5-year-old daughter to join him in East Africa. And so they sat out the Holocaust. Meanwhile, they're getting letters the whole way through of family members getting taken away, and they were able to survive, and, they had their own problems. His wife wasn't very appreciative to be yanked out of Berlin high society to be suffering on a farm in East Africa. And so, it's a great movie. I recommend seeing it. It's called
what?
Nowhere in Africa.
All right.
So that was one of my inspirations. Like, you know what? That guy was a hero. He saved his family. Maybe I should be in East Africa and sit out whatever the ugliness, because I could feel it. After 9/11, people were blaming Israel and the Jews for 9/11. And in general, after the '08 crisis, people were blaming the Jews again. So I'm like,
Well, now that you've brought it up, maybe at this juncture, I might announce that we should do a part 2 of this conversation in which we specifically explore Israel, perceptions of rising anti-Semitism, because that's been a thing in the news lately, courtesy of certain famous people that have become nuisances on social media. That's going to be a very interesting thing that I'd like to explore with you and to understand your feelings and perspectives on the ongoing debate about Semitism, anti-Semitism, Israel, and Jews. And we'll see how that goes. So yeah, but otherwise, I think in this first part of this conversation, I think people watching would have gotten a good sense of who you are and what inspires you and what you're all about. I think a lot of people are intrigued by who you are and are definitely going to want to find out more. Is there anywhere you can point people to just if they want to know more about Joel?
I need to put up a website again. Now that I'm coming out of the tunnel of COVID lockdowns and economic collapse, I think I'll put up a new website.
I think so. I think so too. So for now, if someone wants to reach you, are you on Facebook?
I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
And I even have a page for Joel the Time Traveler. I started a YouTube channel, which I have not added on.
I think I'll post the link to your YouTube video.
Sure.
Below in this video in the description, so people can check it out and see what you're all about.
Well, yeah. I'm sure you know that I've taken on really controversial subjects and tried to thread the needle of nuance and try to avoid getting pulled into the...
Not that that'll save you from all of the anger and outrage.
It doesn't seem to. Although it makes me feel at peace, that I feel like I can have a view that doesn't have me in a state of anger.
Well, let's go there to those very controversial places. We're going to be going into that in part 2 of this conversation that I am having here on the Fatboy Show with Mr. Joel Bellenson. So stick around for part 2. See you in the next video.